Chapter 70. Downstairs, outside, all around, the world went on wobbling and warbling through space, like a jukebox in a canoe, oblivious to her theorizing. The talk out there was of oil and nukes, of prices and wages, of ball scores and celebrities, of careers and illness, of, in a thousand clumsy and evasive ways, how to make love stay. A millionaire had died in a secretary's bed. Horticulturists announced the development of a square watermelon. Somebody in Beverly Hills opened a disco for dogs. On the shores of Puget Sound, October had come in like a lamb chop, breaded in golden crumbs and gently sautéed in a splash of blue oil. Indian summer, some characterized it incorrectly, for technically Indian summer must follow a frost, and there hadn't been a sign of frost since that freak freeze back in April. Rather, it was an extension of summer. Summer had uncoiled and stretched itself out like the garter snakes that, having heard no call to hibernate, still sunned themselves in the blackberry patch. Snakes, all belt and no pants, startled from their prolonged lays only by the occasional fall of a berry, grown fat as a dove's egg, and black as a curse in this longest of summers. The confectionery odor of rotting blackberries wafted to the attic windows on breezes off the sound, a mixture of sugar smell and salt smell that could bring out the renifleur in the primmest nostril. But the attic was shut tight, and no berry scent got in, nor did the dinosaurian squawk of the mallards taking their time this autumn flying south. One noise that normally did penetrate the attic, the muffled raves and roars of the sporting world that leaked up through two ceilings and two floors from Max's television, was also absent. If it was strange that there was no rain that October, the lack of football cheers was stranger yet. So strange that Leisha pried her gaze from the camel package to ask Julietta about it on successive weekends, but the old woman fed Prince Charming flies and could not or would not reply. Truth was, King Max continued to spend his waking hours in front of the Magnavox. He merely neglected to turn it on. In his homeland, the royalist revolutionaries were steamrolling. A month, 6 weeks at the most, the junta would crumble. For 30 years he had dreamed in secret, and with scarcely a dab of hope, of the restoration of the monarchy. Now that skinny, furtive dream was about to come true, only they didn't want him to be their king. There were archaic grievances against him, grudges held over like this same quasi-summer from his previous rule. In addition, the younger revolutionary leaders felt that he had compromised with the CIA. His queen's ties to the Vatican were suspected and scorned. What his country had in mind was a socialist monarchy, somewhat on the order of Sweden or Denmark, a bit to the left of England and considerably to the left of Max. Max would be welcomed home. He would be awarded the summer palace and its grounds on the lake. An allowance substantially more luxurious than that paid him by the Americans would be granted. Tilly would preside over the opera as she had in the past, and weekends his old cronies would gather for grouse shoots and cards. But he would not be head of state. Someone different, someone fresh was needed, they explained. They intended to shuffle the deck. None of his worthless sons was considered. Too many scandals among them, too many land swindles, stock frauds, casino brawls, and public displays of greed. Lee Cherie was the Furstenberg Barcelona they had settled on. Young and bright and beautiful, with a strong social conscience, Lee Cherie would be a perfect figurehead for the new regime. Yet unsavory stories now circulated about her, too. In Europe, in the midst of the fighting, they'd heard that she'd lost her head over a common convict, that she'd locked herself up in an empty attic and wouldn't even come out to poop. They read in the gossip columns that she was, quote, tragic. They wondered if, quote, daffy might not be the word. Max longed to reassure them. How could he honestly do so? He had climbed to the attic. He had observed her, naked, dirty, and alone, yet shining with contentment, talking about, quote, interests, when there were none to be seen. So Max sat before a silent Magnavox, his long equine head nodding at a frozen screen. Perhaps to the old king, the screen was not empty. Perhaps he saw there, in colors more vivid than a picture tube could reproduce, the rich pageantry of his former life. Maybe he saw himself on horseback, a chest full of medals reflecting the noonday sun. Saw himself silver saber skyward, reviewing his troops. Saw the steaming funnels of his small but seaworthy fleet. Saw the pheasant in aspic, the broad hams, the trouts in sauce, the crystal goblets awaiting wine. Dukes he saw, and earls, barons, and prime ministers, presidents and princes, potentates and ambassadors, the tips of their mustaches twinkling with exotic waxes, the tips of their tongues slippery with familiar lies. Saw the white teeth of ladies, their cigarette holders of ivory and onyx, their beaded handbags concealing tiny bottles of custom-made French perfumes. And what mere king could imagine the exact kinds of laces and satins they wore beneath their gowns, next to lotioned loins? Grand parades clattered down grand boulevards. He saw this on the cold TV. Private railway cars rolled through luminous acres of wheat. Opera houses were strung with lights for Christmas. Fine hounds pursued the fox. In Gothic state houses, the stylized din of legislation jostled the chandeliers. And late at night, in windowless rooms carpeted with the richest art of Persia's looms, over mellowed brandy and Havana cigars, the real governments convened. Strong men with wide educations and polished wits met to gossip, grapple, and plot. They spoke of precious metals, of rail lines and currencies and cattle and corn. They positioned armies at this frontier or that one, raised or lowered tariffs, arranged powerful marriages, made decisions that would affect shop girls in Budapest or camel jockeys in Kabul. Their voices were low and grave as they pondered intrigues against them, even lower, yet musical with mirth, as they concocted intrigues against others. To be sure, they acted to enlarge their fortunes as much as to protect the populations who depended upon them. Yet whether the subject was commerce or war, treaties, tributes, or personal perversions of their peers, they, to a man, were consumed by a great, enormous, burning love for the drama of it all, an unrelenting passion for the secret theater of the planet. Those days were gone. Now the world's decisions were made by smaller men, gray, faceless bureaucrats, without vision or wit. Committeemen who spoke committee speak and thought committee thought. Men who knew more of dogma than destiny. Men who understood production but were ignorant of pleasure. Men who are comfortable with a file full, more comfortable with a file full of papers than a fistful of gems. Unsmiling men, unmannered men, undreaming men, men who believed they could guide humanity when they could not seduce a countess nor ride a horse. Why the bandit in black his daughter had dragged home was better fit to rule than any one of them, communist, fascist, or Christian Democrat alike, as tasteless peas in a poisoned pod. It was just as well that they not restore his crown. This was not a time for kings nor queens. Let Princess Lee Cherie bed down with outlaws. Let her moon in the attic if that brought her joy. The gong in his heart was a soft sound now. He wouldn't respond to the queries of his countrymen. They could keep their honorary titles and their villa on the lake. Julieta was his single remaining subject, and he'd see to it that he got the money she was due. Max, the once and nevermore king, would spend the golden October days right where he sat, awaiting the rains, awaiting the blackberries that sooner or later, like the anonymous barbarians of the last quarter of the 20th century, would come slinking through the walls. On Sunday, the Seattle Seahawks were to battle the Dallas Cowboys, if he could remember to turn the knob.